And then later in April, I took a world trip. I went for 7 weeks, nearly travelled around the world. And with this express purpose of doing family history research and just exploring some wild places, because I'm a trail runner and among other things, and so I had a few purposes, but my principal purpose was to go and to explore my family of origin and to visit people in my family tree who I'd never met, and to go to places where my family had come from in the US and in Europe. So the very first day that I got into the United States, it was a Sunday, and I'd arranged to meet some cousins who live in the Palisades area, actually. So their house is burnt down now. They've moved to Nashville, but another cousin, their house burnt down just in this last week. So these are people who are, I call them cousins, but they're not first cousins. They're older people, and they're my mum's side, so they're Jewish relatives. So I got to LA the first night. I had arranged to have dinner with one of these cousins, and her name is Julie Corner, her maiden name, and her husband Steve Greenberg. So Julie and Steve, I get to their house and I knock on the door, and Julie opens the door and she looks at me, and I introduce myself, and she looks and says, "So how are we related again?" And so I go, "Well, the guy that connects our families is a man named Nathan Kona." And she goes, "Wait." And I go, "Okay, I'm still standing in the doorstep." And she goes to a room just next to the entry, and she comes back with a big framed photograph and says, "Do you know who this is?" I have no idea. And she says, "This is Nathan Kona." And I go, "Well, he's the guy that connects me and you together." She says, "Do you know how I got this photo?" I don't. She says, "Well, 2 days ago, I was at another cousin's house clearing out the house because the mother had died, and my cousin said to me, 'Julie, I think you should have this photo.'" And she says, "Who is that?" And he says, "It's Nathan Kona." "Well, why do I need it?" "I don't know, but I think you should have it."
Wow.
So she took it and put it in the room in the front
She knew
foyer.
exactly where it was at.
And 2 days later I show
You
up and I
came.
say, "This is the guy." And she goes, "Don't you find that remarkable?"
Yes.
And I go, "Well, actually, probably not really." But but from that
I
moment,
do. It's your
I
Betsy.
I got to see how, and this is how I view it, I think how God weaves a tapestry for us that's so connected. He can see it, but we can't see it. But every so often he lets us get a glimpse, and to see, I've prepared this for your arrival, and I want you to know that I'm part of what you're doing. And so when Julie, who's obviously a Jewish woman, comes to the door and says, "How are we related?" and I say Nathan Kona, and within 3 minutes of being there, she's got a photo of him that she only got 2 days ago that she'd never really knew existed. And I find that to be remarkable.
We call those the tender mercies.
Yeah, and that
Yes.
was the first of many. And perhaps I can share another one. I visited a cousin in DC. He lives just across the Potomac in Virginia, but he works in DC anyway. He is a family historian. He's a young man, so he was back then, I think, 28 or 29 years old, and had a wife and also a Jewish man. And he knew that I was going to Europe, and he says, "Oh, are you going to the Czech Republic at all?" I said, "Yeah, I'm going to Prague." "Well, do you think you could go and do a couple of things for me while you're there?" I said, "Sure." So he'd asked for me to go to these archives, which I did, but there was a particular cemetery that he wanted a headstone, the details on a headstone from. He said, "Do you think you might be able to go to that cemetery?" I said, "Where is that?" And he said, "Oh, it's in a little town called Horojnetin," which is what it's called now. It used to be called Liechtenstein when it was in the sort of German, Austrian kind of area, but it's now called Horojnetin. And he said there's an old Jewish cemetery there, and in there is a headstone for one of their people in our family that connects us. And he said, I need the details on that headstone. I know it's there, but I don't know what's on it. So could you go to that cemetery? I go, well, I'll figure it out. And it's about 2 hours drive out of Prague. So I go, yeah, I guess I could rent a car and go do it. So that's what I did. And I mean, there were some other experiences with the archives, which I won't tell you about now, but I drive to this place and I drive through this town, and it's the sleepiest little thing you've ever seen. I got a little video of me driving through it because I was so amused by the fact that I didn't see practically anybody. And I couldn't see any signs for a cemetery. So I stop at a little corner store and I walk in there and I ask the shopkeeper, does he speak English? No. And he says, but there's a man standing out there, he will speak English. So I go out there and I start to speak to this guy and I'm saying, I'm looking for a cemetery. Oh, and his English wasn't that good. So I got Google Translate and I'm saying, I need to find this cemetery. It's a Jewish cemetery. And he says, okay. And he speaks in Czech and he translates it back and he tells me it's up there, and he points and I'm looking and there's a forest. He goes, it's up there. And so he says, you have to go down to this end of this street, there's a roundabout, go up there, and if you get to the next town, you've gone too far. I go, okay, it's off to the right in the forest. Okay. So I drive and I get to the next town, I've gone too far. And then I'm driving back and I go and I see a lady walking along the side of the street with her grandmother in a wheelchair, and I stop and ask these ladies, English? Oh, a little bit. So I'm looking for this cemetery. Oh, yeah. You have to go down here and it's off in the left. And if you get to a hotel with bikes leaning on the fence, then you've gone too far. I go, okay. So I'm driving down, looking. I couldn't see any streets, and there's a train track there and no cemetery.
Wow.
And then I park my car and I see this guy working in his yard. I'm going to try one more time.
Third time's the charm.
And so I walk up to this man and he comes over and I said, English? No. How about German? No. A little bit German. Okay. And he says, Czech? No. So I try Google Translate, out of internet range. So he gets a stick and he draws in the ground with sort of speaking little bits of German together, and he draws the train track. He says, Zug, you know Zug? Yes, train. Okay, and he does his fingers walking on this little map of the train track. I go, I walk on the train track? Yes. And he says, right. And so he draws a line off to the right. Somewhere in the Wald, in the forest, yep, there's the cemetery, Friedhof there. I go, oh, I have to walk on the train tracks and look for a track, and then I walk up in there.
I'm in a strange town and people are directing me in different places to the forest. Okay.
So I eventually get to this forest.
Okay.
I walk on the train track and I videoed this little thing because it was so entertaining to me. And I said, Josh, this is for you. This better work. I mean, if I end up like Peter and the Wolf and
Hansel and Gretel.
something.
Exactly.
Anyway, there's this cemetery in the middle of the forest with a wall and a gate, and it's locked. It hasn't been used for 100 years. And so I climb the wall and I go, well, the headstones are all in a foreign language.
Oh, right.
They're in either Hebrew or in German. And I go, oh, I'm not going to be able to read them anyway. So I thought, I've got my
Video
phone.
all of it.
So I photographed using a little app called Billion Graves.
Okay.
I photographed 145 headstones, any headstone that I could find, and I lifted some up now there's a record of that cemetery on Billion Graves. And I sent my cousin Josh. I said, I did the pictures, you've now got to do the translation. So, but that was a really fun experience to just go there and to feel connected to people who are long gone, but just this sense of respect for what they had been through. And if you know any of the history of the Jews through the centuries, they've always had to live in little enclaves separate from society because they were always
ostracized.
They were persecuted for centuries. And so knowing that meant that I felt kind of a little bit more compassion and connected, and just felt such a sense of reverence for, even though they haven't received the Saviour Jesus Christ yet, but they preserved things that us as Christians today enjoy the benefit of that without their sacrifice we wouldn't have. So, yeah.
So Joel, was that cemetery, I just have to ask, first of all, did your cousin find what he wanted?
He did, and it was an 800-year-old connection.
And so your video picked it up?
Well, I didn't take a video of me walking in the cemetery,
Right.
all the headstones, but I photographed each headstone, and from the photographs he was able to identify the one that he needed.
You're on the Lord's errand.
Indeed.
And then that cemetery was specifically for a Jewish
It's just a Jewish cemetery. Yeah.
Covered up by a wall.
Yeah, and surrounded by a forest. And if I showed you a picture of it, you go like,
Yes.
I can't even see a cemetery there at all.
Wow.
You have to walk through the forest to find it.